I've heard someone say to me the other week that data is a bit like water in an organization. You don't realize that it's there until it's gone.
Being small, you've got the advantage of no vested careers or fear of mistakes. The worst thing that happens to you is you die.
Yeah.
So you're excited to make mistakes, excited to learn from them and build a system that works.
If you have a decision that is going to cost less than $1,000, then you make the judgment call, and that's fine. And whatever the outcome of that is on me, but I'm delegating that level of decision-making authority. And he spoke about what a huge enabler and unlock it was for a scale.
You're listening to the Transformed with Data podcast with Graeme Crawford, CEO of Crawford Macmillan. Graeme is here to share something he's genuinely passionate about. He's going to show you how data can completely change the outcome for both people and businesses. In each episode, he sits down with real people who've done incredible things with data. But don't worry, these aren't your typical dry case studies. Graeme and his guests bring you stories about leaders and innovators who saw something in their data that sparked a brand new reality. These are changes that tore through entire industries, upended company cultures, and sometimes even changed lives. So whether you're a data enthusiast or just curious about how to find the truth in your data, join Graeme as he discovers how data becomes more than just numbers. It becomes the spark that ignites real, meaningful change. Let's get started. Thanks for listening.
Most companies say they're data-driven. Dmitri Adler knows that they're not, and he can prove it. He's the co-founder of Data Society, a bootstrap powerhouse that went from 2 laptops to an 8-figure exit. And along the way, Dmitri has trained thousands of professionals, from Fortune 500 execs to federal agencies, not just in data skills, but in rethinking how organizations operate with data. After automating weeks of Wall Street work into a single afternoon, he had a realization. The real opportunity isn't in doing the analysis, it's in empowering everyone to use the data as fluently as possible. In today's episode, we'll cover why dashboards won't save your culture, the silent killers of true data adoption, and what separates companies that scale with data from those that stall. If you've ever wondered why your team has the tools but not the traction, this one is for you. Here is Dmitri. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, Graeme. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you on. I know we've had a couple of great conversations already, and I know you've got a lot of awesomeness that you can share with the crew of regular listeners here. So I'll start with a tricky question, and it's about successful leaders. It's successful leaders who were successful, but they become their own worst enemy when it comes to data adoption. So how does that happen? How do people go from success to failure in the process of adopting data, something which should, in theory, help them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what data is intended to do is to measure activity, empower thoughtful analysis of that activity and those processes, and making them better. So if you start in a good place of saying, oh, well, this is easy. We're going to have our data collection capability. We're going to store the data. We're going to make sure that we have good analysts looking at the data to extract insights. That often misses the elephant in the room, which is, what is the business process you're trying to model? I know it's
right,
like boring consulting speak, but the practical reality of it is you have to have a really good understanding of what happens mechanically in your organization in order to interpret correctly the insights that the data is giving you. And then once you have those insights, it's about working with your team to adjust those behaviors. Now, behaviors don't come out of nowhere. There's usually a whole incentive structure that has caused things to act in a certain way. So in short, I find folks skip the step of analyzing why things are the way they are. And if you were to change them, what else has to be adjusted and why?
Yeah, I love that. And I used to preach probably a little too hard to my teams in corporate environments about understanding context and how context was the key to great data analysis and building great data products. Because what people, be it leaders or clients or customers or users, whoever it might be, say they want is often different from what they actually want or what they actually need, and they don't always state it in language that translates directly across to the realm of data professionals. So collecting that context and that understanding of what is really driving the business forward, I think, is critical.
Yeah, I think so much of our jobs as consultants effectively is diagnostics. To, as you correctly said, not just do what you think that what the client's asking to do, but like a good physician to really diagnose the root cause of the problem rather than the symptoms that they're ultimately complaining about, and bring the customer along on that journey so that they can see what the root causes are and be sufficiently self-reflective to understand how they got to that point. I think that's a lot of where things can go wrong sometimes as well, which is people struggling to admit the fact that it's some of the things that they did in the past or that are causes of the current state,
Yeah.
not feeling like they have the latitude internally to be transparent about how and why things can be improved without the fear of saying, oh, well, you made a mistake, therefore here's adverse consequences.
I know how that goes in corporate environments for sure. And it brings me back to another point that I've come across a few times of what an organization says it prioritizes versus what it rewards, and the behavior that rewards. And through that, you begin to get to hidden metrics that actually are far better indicators of how well the organization is doing or not. I heard about a fun hidden metric on a podcast the other week of one of the best hidden metrics for how happy a person is how many hours per year they spend in a hammock. I know I was measuring that stuff, but you can see why it might work. But you're right, and in the example you talk about, we may say that we reward innovation and bold, courageous thinking and fail fast. And I've heard organizations, all types of organizations, claim to reward that, but then actually what they do is punish people who make mistakes or punish people who do fail fast, and then you get in this vicious cycle that kills progress, and puts the focus on measurement in entirely the wrong place.
That was one of the big things in our ethos as we grew, is we never punish people for making a mistake, ever. And now, of course, it took a lot of stamina on the part of the founders who had personal financial risk at stake. But what it helped create is a culture of complete transparency where people would raise a hand and say, hey, listen, I made a mistake and here's what happened. And that was, in fact, the only get out of jail free card, right? If people hid their mistake, that was an immediate dismissal. But if they actually made their mistake public and helped everybody learn from it, there was actually a carrot at the end of that action and saying, okay, thank you for helping us all be better. You should also be better, but here's, how do we move forward as an organization? As a result, we ended up with people who stayed for a long time. We had retention figures much above industry standard. And in tech over the past 10 years, that was a rarity.
Oh, indeed.
Right.
Yeah.
And then people got promoted, they got meaningfully more responsibility. And even when they left, we were very proud about where they went to. Those were meaningful promotions, much bigger jobs. And that was a function of the skills they developed by trying a lot of stuff, learning what doesn't work, and becoming really good at figuring out what does and how to make it so.
Yeah, it's the fastest way to improve, and I think there's the famous marshmallow and spaghetti challenge where you try and build the highest towers. And outside of structural engineers, the group that consistently performs well is kids, because they haven't got that inbuilt fear of making mistakes. So they try stuff. Like, they don't sit down as human beings, especially consultants or professionals, white collar professionals would do, and like try and establish a leadership structure and then talk about a strategy and whatever else. And then by that time, 10 minutes in, they've done nothing, and the kids have learned 8 different ways that marshmallows and spaghetti don't build together, just by picking it up and doing it. And those are mistakes which they're very different types of mistakes, right, Dmitri? So they're mistakes made in good intent to try something out that didn't work, and maybe with a bit more context or a bit more thought, you might have been able to work that out in advance. But you've made a mistake in good intent. It's very different to gross negligence of like, I didn't try very hard, or I overlooked something fundamental here that it would be realistic to expect me in whatever role I'm in to have picked up.
I think it really, going back to your original question of how do things go wrong when you implement data projects, I think another fault that people commit is to assume that it's going to work in their organization exactly the way that it worked somewhere else. It will not. It will absolutely not. And so while you can adopt best practices, you can adopt rules of thumb, what you have to be comfortable with is to deploy something, learn from how it doesn't work, and have the political will to do another rotation, another iteration, and just understand that there's the basic principle, the basic truth, that the only way to make something better is to measure it.
Yeah.
And if you're not measuring it with a capital M, not just mechanically in a back room, some poor engineer does that. No, you talk about it in meetings, you communicate about that, you make it public, and you make the mistakes public, and you make the whole cycle public, So you have to develop truly that culture, and that is how you can indeed achieve a data-driven transformation, achieve superior results with data, because by then your processes have become tailored to your situation, the size of your organization, the personnel that you have, the industry that you're in. That's a very key thing to do. I think JP Morgan at least talks about it in the right way, in terms of, we want entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs
Yeah.
within the organization. And having worked there, I've seen some great examples of that in action, back during my tenure. That's kind of the mentality that I think business leaders need to have, is to understand what it takes to home grow a cadre of entrepreneurs, rather than have these people go somewhere else and do that for not you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. By rewarding the right behavior, and the other power of that approach that you mentioned, of bringing everything to the front and to the top of the house, and putting it in the shop window, about what you're measuring, and how you're adjusting it. One of the common complaints that I've heard from different leaders across my whole career has been like, oh, I have this strategy, but the team doesn't seem to get it. Like, what clearer way to double down on what your strategy is than to say, this is what I'm measuring, and this is how I'm adjusting the staffing, the priorities, the resource allocation in this organization based on this number. Then there's no doubt, right?
Yeah, you got to have the why. You got to have the why. I mean, I'm sure you know the social psychology experiment, where people in line for, I forget what, something like a printer, which
Yeah.
would butt in and they would get kicked out. But if they said, "Hey, can you please let me cut in line because I really have to be somewhere," like, that doesn't change the actual context of the situation. But since they gave them because, all of a sudden doors open.
It's always all about the story. Some people can be skeptical about data, investments in data in particular. I've heard someone say to me the other week that data is a bit like water in an organization. You don't realize that it's there until it's gone. And of course, we can't, as data professionals, rely on switching all the data infrastructure off to prove the value of it. I mean, that seems a very extreme way of doing it. What are some of the best ways to convince leadership team or convince organizations that an investment in data is a good idea, when they may be skeptical about it, and you can't draw a straight line to return on investment because you haven't pulled the insight out of that work yet?
It's always a tough one. I think it actually goes back to understanding how things work, and it goes back to incentives. So usually, if you have incentives that say, "Do not make mistakes," then the more you can hide rationale, the more you can hide truth, the more advantaged you are. So I think sometimes people obfuscate and resist data-driven initiatives, data transformation initiatives, because they say, "Well, that'll shine a very clear light about what I'm potentially doing wrong. And I'm going
Yeah.
to hand over this." And so you have to remove that impediment first. So then when your pitch is, "No, no, look, we're going to find out the truth. We'll just have truth." All of a sudden, that concept has to be appealing. I find that, yeah, it's the incentive structure that usually torpedoes efforts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I find this as an entrepreneur as well as an entrepreneur, like, in order to get top-down commitment to doing something in a new way, we first have to accept that the old way is at least suboptimal, if not broken. And that's often attached to somebody's achievement or somebody's promotion or somebody's reputation at the company or whatever it might be. So there's political resistance and personal brand related resistance can emerge as well.
But I think the answer is you actually keep the pilot group small. So rather than trying to get somebody to bite off a huge chunk, you've got to go to these senior leaders who've had a career at this organization and say, "Look, why don't we do a small pilot? It'll be closed doors, right? Let's agree on a very limited budget, and you'll be the only one privy to the results." And that way, it doesn't have to be a big to do. It can be a small project your engineers help out with, and then you'll get a front row seat. That's often worked really well. And the last bit, honestly, is just bringing in new blood. Best way to transform an organization is to bring in somebody who doesn't have a vested interest in perpetuating the status quo.
Yeah.
Cynical as that is. I know in our sales efforts when we're growing the business, those were always our best customers, people who've been in their jobs for less than a year, because they actually were super interested in learning the truth and being able to demonstrate they can do something better. So I think if you're in a leadership position, it's actually a pretty savvy thing to do, to bring in somebody new and give that initiative to that person.
Yeah, especially if it's an objective person who he doesn't mean trying to sell the benefits of consultancy, of course, but yeah, especially it's an objective person who's not necessarily tied into the same incentive structure as everybody else as well.
Exactly, exactly. And tell them that they've got a year or so to define their role. I think as amorphous as that is, that can actually often be helpful in that you can figure out exactly what's necessary of the position. Anytime you create a new one, as you can understand, it's only an assumption about what the role is supposed to do. And so while you can craft that, you should give them the latitude to provide a measurable approach to success. And I think in allowing for wiggle room around how that's determined, that's where you're going to have the ability to make mistakes without repercussions. And so
Right.
by the end of the year, you brought in somebody new. They've been able to redefine exactly what that role is. You know what the truth and true north is. And look, if they've done that poorly, then you know what you just found out? You're doing things pretty well, or you just hired poorly. But
Oh, all our options, all our options for considering. So sometimes, we do it well, we get the right buy-in, we create the right conditions, we build some momentum around a data initiative, build a team, and then we go. And sometimes they still fail. What are some of the reasons that even with the correct conditions and a following wind that data initiatives can sometimes still fall flat?
what are the conditions in which data initiatives fall flat?
Yeah, even with leadership support and a team and the investment behind them, like we've done the hard part, but yet we still fail.
Yeah, oftentimes it's the frozen middle. It's a function of the size of the organization. So, especially as you become huge, like Capital One, JP Morgan, the Air Force,
Hmm.
on the one hand, a very senior leader can say, I want X to happen. On the other hand, because they're so high up and their organization is measured in thousands of bodies, resistance at the middle level can actually meaningfully grind the gears. Some
Right.
people are awaiting retirement. Some people are awaiting another bogey, in their personal journey. And so ensuring that there's alignment up and down the chain is key. And frankly, you do that by keeping it small. So Andy Jassy just gave a really interesting interview with, I believe, Bloomberg. And he talked about some of the ethos that they have at Amazon. Right now in Amazon Foods, which includes Amazon Fresh, their Whole Foods,
Right.
and so on. They've sort of declared a quote unquote war on bureaucracy. And the way that Andy Jassy was describing it is he said, you just have to keep teams small. When he looks at the biggest successes they've had at Amazon, it's never been done by a team of more than 11 people.
Wow.
Like Amazon Compute was built by 11 people,
Yeah, they've done some big things. Yeah.
was built by 11 people. And so, in his observation, when you become a big organization of people, that's when challenges start. And I'll tell you, even with us, even in our relatively tight organization of 100 or so folks, like magical things started to happen once you eclipse certain scales, right? Once humans got together in certain groups, politics organically blossomed, even though my co-founders and I really bristled at that notion. And so even in a team as small as 100, our lesson was, if you want to get something done, keep that nexus super, super small.
It reminds me of actually, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I'm past the era of getting regular invitations to bachelor parties, but I was reflecting on that era, and I hope I don't get any more, because if I get any more invitations, it means one of my friends' marriages has broken down and he's had to get a new one. So I hope I never go on another bachelor party, other than maybe my kids. But during that era, it was about I identified 12 as that critical number. So you can draw an itinerary for a weekend, and it would be the usual things of we'll do this activity on Friday, we'll have dinner this place on lunch this place on Saturday, we'll play life-size table soccer on Saturday afternoon, whatever it might be. As soon as the group got to 12 or more, splintering happened. And splintering is that, like, a small group, it could be 2, 3, 4, whatever it would be, would deviate from the planned agenda and go and do their own thing. And I think if you had 10 or 11, that didn't happen. So I think I've seen the same thing. Granted, we weren't building AWS Compute on bachelor parties, but I think I've seen the same social dynamic play out even in situations. It's the nature of humans, right?
And I think, one of the things I thought you want to talk about was sort of the challenge of being small in a startup and going up against some of the big players. I think what we were just talking about speaks exactly to that. when you're starting up, you've got the advantage of being small. You've got the advantage of no vested careers or fear of mistakes. The worst thing that happens to you is you die, you know?
Yeah.
So you're excited to make mistakes, excited to learn from them and build a system that works. And you definitionally are forced to stay nimble. I think, the challenge, the advantage in that situation is you can make every single person be an impactful contributor. And I think the trouble starts when you have people start to manage effectively, when people stop seeing themselves as I am going to do this today myself. And when people start to more delegate and act in that capacity, there's certainly a time and a place for that. But that approach is very difficult to actually get something tangible accomplished. Certainly as a startup, whether you were a brand new organization or a part of a big behemoth.
And it's something I reference to myself actually as I think about deals that I'm involved in, because sure, like I'm less than a year into the company, so I'm involved to some extent in the delivery for some more than others, but to some extent in delivery for each client. And if I compare that to the level of knowledge of like, here's 25 years spanning like two of the big consultancies plus a Fortune 100 financial services company, sure, you could get the same from McKinsey, or you could go to Accenture yourself, or whatever else, but likely for the same price, you're going to be sent someone just out of college because of their price structure, which is fixed and they can't move, right? And because of the way they hand out work is fixed and they can't move. So actually, as you say, like I have the advantage of being able to provide a much greater level of skill and experience, but actually for a lower cost, because I don't have any of the overheads or commitments or politics that a big consultancy firm would have.
Yeah, you can be super nimble and you can be in the chili of it all. And I also want to make sure that as we talk about managing versus delegating, we don't confuse two notions, because as you scale an organization, you shouldn't have your fingers in all the pies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I meant to be precise is there's a difference between sort of middle managers that delegate rather than do, and leaders who delegate not the task but the decision-making authority.
Yeah.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
If you don't delegate decision-making authority but just the task, that's when you have bureaucracy. If you delegate the authority to do something, then you actually are creating a situation where you can indeed scale the organization.
CEOs, if you're still making big decisions based on outdated dashboard, conflicting numbers, and manual reports, then you're not leading with confidence. You're not alone. Most 5 million plus businesses have this exact struggle, and your tech stack and platforms feel like they're duct taped together. Worse, every week that goes by, you're still flying blind. And if AI is part of your roadmap, well, you can forget about it, because clean connected data is step one. So you're still in the starting blocks while others are running ahead of you. That's why we created the free 5-minute data maturity assessment. It's fast, it's free, and it shows you where your business stands and what's holding you back. You'll walk away with a clear score, a snapshot of your current systems, and insight into what it'll take to build a data infrastructure to support your ambition. It's the same approach I've used inside global firms like Capital One, IBM, and Accenture. And now it's adapted for fast-scaling businesses like yours. We've helped executive teams gain clarity, reduce friction, and make better decisions with the data they already have. No giant software overhaul, no disruption to your team, no data science degree required. Also, no magic wand apps that are too good to be true and sell a dream that is effectively only papering over the cracks of structural data issues. This is about giving CEOs real visibility and helping you lead with facts, not friction. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start leading with real data clarity, take our free assessment. It only takes 5 minutes. You'll get immediate insight on your current maturity and just what's possible next. Click below to get started. You've scaled your sales, your operations, your sales team. Now it's time to scale your data. I've led data transformations for some of the world's most complex companies. And now I help CEOs and leadership teams just like yours turn data into a real advantage. Let's get started. Yeah, I read there was a really cool example of this that I read in Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek book, where he talked about he had VAs from a different country. He'd sourced them internationally, and actually as his business scaled, like he kept getting more and more questions. And one of the best moves I think I recall him saying is like, If you have a decision that is going to cost less than $1,000, then you make the judgment call, and that's fine. And whatever the outcome of that is on me, but like I'm delegating that level of decision making authority. And he spoke about what a huge enabler and unlock it was for a scale.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as you grow as an organization, that number changes over time. But that's exactly the right approach. And so going back to the topic of how do you make data initiatives effective, you offer what in the military is called commander's intent. You say, for example, we want to make our HR systems better. And you know what? We're going to measure and we're going to have empirical proof of why we're going to do things a certain way. But here, John and Ann, you guys have this project. You have decision-making authority about exactly how to do it. Hire your own contractors, bring your own people. And that actually tends to work. And, obviously keep your team small. And I think that type of delegation does indeed tend to work pretty well.
Yeah, it's magic, isn't it? I often talk about data and technology in themselves or in isolation, not being a business case. And it's a mistake I've seen at some companies, big and small. And I think one of my favorite stories that I talk about is back at the advent of unstructured data, when Hadoop data lakes were a new thing. I saw a number of initiatives across companies that were related to how much data can we put in this data lake. But yeah, inevitably, once it gets there, you can't point your BI tools at it. You can't even write SQL against it, and nobody else knows how to do anything other than write SQL in that particular moment back in whenever it was, 2012, 2011, that era. To me, that's a classic problem of people leading with technology rather than leading with business. What are some of the other potential costs that come along, and have you seen examples of companies getting into tough places because there's a big trap right now with AI, right? Like, we want to do AI for what? Not sure. When? No, right? That kind of vibe. So it's a very prescient and relevant subject as well. Have you seen companies maneuver into tricky spots?
I'll give you a two-part answer. So the other day, I wanted to help a friend set up a website. My brother's got a small little consulting thing, and I'm helping him out. And so I watched a tutorial on YouTube about how to use Wix to generate a website.
Mhm.
And the first few minutes go kind of like this. So here's Wix, and you can actually use their AI tool to create a website, or you can use a bunch of their preset templates and just configure them to make your own website. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's what I did 11, 12 years ago. And the narrator, the instructor, continues to talk and say, the AI tool is cool and fancy, but frankly, the template is just so much faster because it's professionally designed with a handful of best practices. You don't need the AI to learn those 5 or 6 best practices for how it
Because they're hard coded in there, right?
Exactly. And so the AI tool is going to give you some good stuff, but it's going to give you a bunch of nonsense right now, right? As well, right? So what was amazing is that building a website today is simple. Trying to solve a problem where doing it the way it is today with a bunch of excellent preset templates is simple. That's a bad use case for AI. You're taking a very complicated, very expensive technology ultimately and trying to apply it to a solved problem to make a minor incremental improvement. And so rather than that, use AI to target problems that don't have a simple solution already that works well based on a handful of rules, right?
Yeah.
Coded rules. So when you're talking about things that go awry, it's often things like that where the true utility of the function hasn't been thought out, and the process for how something hasn't been mapped out, right? Like, what's a process? Like delivery, right? Driver gets box put on truck goes, driver exits truck, drops off box. You don't need an AI to kind of solve something like that, right? And I think an interesting case is if somebody were to try to use Tesla's Optimus to try to do that, I wonder how much that's sort of an incremental shift versus a fundamental improvement in the arena of delivery. And in fact, if you wanted the delivery to be better, do you instead use AI for self-driving trucks altogether, right? That just leave a box by the curb. It's a little, it's not a perfect analogy, but I think you see what I'm saying in terms of the complexity of the problem. So how does it go wrong? You apply AI to the wrong problem. without understanding the mechanic.
Yeah, with that, and that understanding what you're trying to do or what the limitations of that tool might be. The other example I come across is, and I love this as an innovation playground, but Zapier and NAN and Make.com and these other things that allow you to string together different platforms and tools that might not necessarily have hard-coded API integrations in them to chain together something of like, oh, this thing happened in the internet, therefore it's going to send this Slack message here and then add something on this Google Sheet here and then wherever else. And it's super cool for it, understanding a business process and maybe like some personal efficiency automation for sure. But then I see people try and take that to the next level and say, oh, I'm going to build this SaaS platform on top of a Zapier flow. And like, clearly folks who have never had to support a enterprise platform before who don't realize the huge catalog of risks that introduce, like one API in that chain gets changed, or one of the commands in that API gets changed or stops working for whatever reason, and your whole house falls down. It's and there's no real need to do it either. It's there's an era of things being slightly over engineered going on for the purpose of being and this is a red flag for me when I hear it, an AI forward company. Like, what do you mean? Right? You could equally say, oh, I'm a database forward company, but like, what does that mean either? Right? It's got to serve a purpose in the end.
Yeah, like Andrei Karpathy, the former head of AI at Tesla, recently gave a really cool talk where he talked about his engineering stack and what AI does and does not mean to him. And he basically put up a square, right? So if you can just imagine a square, most of it is one color, right? And then he said, so this is what my code base looked like 10 years ago, right? Which was mostly, C, C++. Then he takes it a couple of years forward and says, well, this is sort of the machine learning was introduced, maybe at 10% of the square or 20% of the square is taken up by what's machine learning. And he goes, and then AI is introduced, and that's another bit. And then he has Gen AI and says, well, that's sort of a Gen AI bit here. And he said, look, what you got to realize is there's so much buzz around Gen AI just taking over software engineering. And he goes, I can't imagine a world where that's true, and this is one of the biggest luminaries in the world of AI and at scale engineering. His perspective was there's a reason why C and C++ were invented. Those reasons are not going to disappear. They're just not. And so if you want, as you said, stable, scalable, reliable software, you still need scaffolding in the tried and true languages, right? Not old and tired, but tried and true. And then again, there are great places for if-then type algorithms, if-then statements, SQL statements, and so on. So he sees it as having AI, Gen AI, and whatever comes next as components that solve very specific functions for a given capability. But you've got to be certain that the ability to conjure up an image from scratch or a piece of data from scratch is a fundamental need that's required in what you're doing, and not a gimmick.
Yeah, and no, something flash. I do love all the flashy play things with AI. I'm the first to fall into that trap and put a post out with like, look what I did. But yeah, as you say, implementing it into an enterprise business critical platform is an entirely different bar altogether.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, like I'm probably asking this question more selfishly, but I'm sure there are many kind of entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs listening as well. How do you maintain like that authenticity and that connection? You spoke about like scaling your company from a couple of laptops to an 8-figure exit, and along the way, obviously your team gets larger than 11 at some point, and the politics come in. But how do you make the leap from startup scrappiness and agility to enterprise credibility? And how do you manage the sort of transition between the two without losing momentum?
So credibility comes from the quality of your work. And you have to put that first. So you do something, you do customer surveys, you ask them how things are going. And you do the same thing with your staff, right? We always ask our staff, how's it going? And the way that my co-founders and I saw ourselves, we saw ourselves as working for our staff, even though they may not have always thought that way, but it was,
or felt that way. Yeah.
Even it was indeed true. We did the best we could. And we always felt like we were working for them, not the other way around. And so, and we told them that the only thing we care about is the customer's happiness. The customer's happy, we're happy with you. The customer is happy. I don't care how nice you are to me, you're gone, right? And so that created a laser focus on the work being done. In terms of scaling and growing, we actually just waited for things to break, to be honest with you. Like
Right.
I could tell you that we were so incredibly smart and we could anticipate every single nook and cranny and
Of
turn.
course.
We couldn't. And anybody who tells me that they can, I just don't believe them, even if it's Elon Musk, right? Look at how many rockets blow up. And that's a good thing. You blow up rockets to figure out how to fly them. That's why NASA moved slower. They were
Yeah, before you put people in them.
Yeah,
Right.
right. But NASA was afraid to blow up rockets, right? And SpaceX said, no, we're going to blow up rockets. And from those blow-ups, we're going to learn how it works. So it was the same thing in our business in that we waited for something to break. A classic example was, I think we got to 20, 25 people, and then our CTO sat us down and said, guys, if you want me to continue working here, you're going to have to find a head of HR. And I said, head of HR, just like come to me if you need stuff. And the person was like, no, I'm not going to do that. We need a proper HR system. Like people are starting to build their careers here. They care about this place. It's very weird if you're talking to an owner who has autocratic powers about an issue, hire an HR person.
Yeah.
So we did. And that was very much how we grew as we scaled, in that it's our employees that actually came to us, and we created an environment where they felt safe in doing that and saying, if you want this to go well, here's a thing that I need. And we did our best we couldn't always afford what was being asked, but we always did our best to try to accomplish that. And we were transparent with our staff about, hey, listen, if you can get this customer to re-up, if you can deliver so much value and really understand their business so they give you even more money so you can make them successful, great. You know what? We're going to use that money to get this next thing that you're asking for.
Right.
And the same thing was true about our policies and procedures, like things like whether it be parental leave or unlimited PTO or other things. So I think our secret to success was, rather than thinking that we as the founders are so smart and know everything, we actually kind of let the market or the world define that for us. And that worked spectacularly well.
Oh, I'd love to hear that. Yeah. It's like you let the market forces that drive the revenue basically drive some of the decision making. And another thing about the approach you mentioned that I love is the clarity of like, this is what's important. And we talked about it in a data perspective, and here you are mentioning it again in a leadership perspective. If this, then that, right? Here's what's important to me. So if you can deliver this, then I can help you with the thing that you need as well. And I think that clarity is missing in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine now. She runs a venture fund called RevUp. They work with a lot of small businesses and really help them go sort of maybe not entirely 0 to 1, but certainly like 0.1, to 2.
Right.
And I asked her, I said, you've seen so many founders and you've seen so many huge success stories and equally some failures. What do you notice is the main discriminating factor between those? And she said that the folks that fail are usually dogmatically attached to their vision. The entrepreneurs who have a vision or are dead set on making that specific vision work are much more likely than anyone else to fail. And it's actually folks who say, you know what? I guess we're doing a 180 today.
Yeah, I guess I was wrong. Yeah.
You develop this just complete ability to say, oh, I guess I'm wrong. I guess we're going this way, and build very adaptive teams, adaptive organizations. They tend to flourish. And oftentimes the thing they end up building is not at all the thing they set out to build, yet it succeeds.
But it's the thing that the market needs, that there's demand for, that they have a capability to supply. Yeah. It's, always back to basics, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the same thing with data initiatives, right? Because if you're building an internal data initiative, it's a bit of a startup as well, right? Even if you're doing it as part of a huge organization. And so, you as a senior leader might say, you know what, we're going to do a data initiative to improve, I don't know, click-through rates of our marketing.
Yeah.
Cool. You've got to have the, if you really, really care about the success rather than the proving that you were right bit, then you got to be comfortable and say, you know what we learned, what we improved wasn't our click-through rate, but our employee retention, which seems like a total totally orthogonal goal, but that may end up being the thing that actually makes the greatest positive P&L impact on your organization. And so I think that's been so key. And I've just been humbled again and again and again that no matter how many times I start something or try something new, the best thing I can do is set up a good experiment.
That's a great message to leave with. And I make it my goal on my own KPI for the next week or for the next month or maybe even the next year, Dmitri, to be as wrong as many times as possible, and to embrace and flourish it within that incorrectness, knowing that it's what it actually is a validated pointer to one of the 990 things that don't work on the road to the one thing that does. So
that for you, because if you think about it, right, and if as the listeners think about this concept, it's almost a counterintuitive one. If you are always right, or consistently right, odds are you are doing things that are already known and discovered.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen this elsewhere. You're doing things that are discovered, and therefore the ability for you to make an outsized impact or make money there are probably relatively slim, even if you might find a specific opportunity. In aggregate, it's going to be slim. But if you're making mistakes and you're learning things that you certainly didn't know and you imagine most people haven't discovered yet, that's where you're going to get rich.
Yeah, that's what the answer is. So, thanks so much for sharing that, and thanks again for spending the time today and sharing the insight from successful journeys, and hopefully many more to come as well. So, if folks are interested in finding out what you're up to next, or checking out some of the stuff that you've been involved in, like where should they go and where should they find you?
Yeah, well, I'm active on LinkedIn, or people can reach out to me at dmitri.adler@gmail.com. Much more accessible than you would imagine.
And I can vouch firsthand for what an excellent and sage source of advice and counsel and wisdom Dmitri is, outside of podcasts as well as on. So looking forward to continuing those conversations as well. And thanks for everything that you've helped me out with so far. Much appreciated.
Of course, this has been so much fun, and I'd love to do it again. Thank you, Graeme.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Transformed with Data. If today's conversation gave you even one insight, one aha moment, or one new idea to take action on, do me a favor. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who's ready to level up. Until next time, keep asking the right questions, keep challenging the status quo, and keep transforming with data.